Welcome to the Curiosity and Co podcast, conversations for the incurably curious. In a world racing towards fast paced answers, at Curiosity and Co, we slow down to explore questions that shape our inner lives and collective realities. This is a place for thinkers, readers, and the wanderers of the mind, those who find wonder in ideas and meaning in complexity. Hosted by a mind drawn to philosophy, psychology, and the hidden logic of the world, each episode offers a reflective dive into philosophy, science, psychology, and how we think, live, and relate to the world. Whether drawing from the timeless thinkers or modern scientific insights, the podcast invites you to stretch your perspective and see the familiar in unfamiliar ways. Tune in for the ideas, stay for the insight. Because curiosity isn't just a trait, it's a worldview. Hello, friends. Today we are going to talk about winning the long term game, about game theory and global politics. At first, some disclaimer: winning the long game theory and global politics. Educational purpose. This podcast explores game theory principles applied to political science for educational and knowledge sharing purposes only. Content represents theoretical analysis, not political commentary or advocacy. Non-partisan approach. We deliberately avoid naming political parties or individuals to maintain analytical objectivity. Our focus is on strategic behavior patterns and game theory concepts, not partisan positions or ideological debates. Global academic analysis. Examples from India, the United States, and the UK are used as case studies to demonstrate universal game theory principles across different democratic systems. Intellectual discourse. We encourage discussions focused on game theory applications, strategic analysis, and democratic processes, not partisan political debates or ideological arguments. No political endorsement. The host and the producers do not endorse any political party, candidate, or ideology in this podcast. All observations are made from a strategic behavior analysis perspective using established game theory frameworks. Theoretical framework. This podcast applies game theory models to complex real world situations as educational tools for understanding strategic interactions, not as comprehensive political guidance. Viewer responsibility. Listeners are encouraged to think critically about concepts presented and engage respectfully with the theoretical frameworks discussed. Academic freedom. This content operates under principles of scholarly inquiry and academic freedom, based on publicly available information and observable political phenomena. Focus on learning. Our goal is to enhance understanding of strategic interactions in democratic systems through established game theory principles, contributing to more analytically rigorous political discourse. And some comment policy for you. Please focus discussions on game theory concepts and strategic analysis rather than partisan politics. A respectful intellectual engagement with the theoretical framework is encouraged. Hello and welcome to the Winning the Long Game, where we explore how game theory reveals the hidden strategies shaping politics, power, and cooperation across the globe. I'm your host. Let's begin. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating puzzles in contemporary politics. Why do some political strategies seem to work repeatedly, even when they appear to undermine the very system they operate in? And more specifically, why does it seem like the certain movements win again and again, despite concerns about democratic norms? We will explore this through examples from three major democracies: the tension between secular, inclusive versus region centric politics in India, the clash between institutionalist versus populist movements in America, and the struggle between pro European versus Brexit supporting forces in the UK. But here's what makes this interesting. The game theory insights we uncover apply to any democracy where competing forces must decide: do we play by the rules or do we bend them to win? I want you to think about this question as we go. If you were advising a political movement that believes in democratic norms but keeps losing to opponents who seem willing to break those norms, what would you tell them? Whether you are thinking about secular parties facing religious nationalism, institutionalists facing populists, or pro Europeans facing nationalist movements, hold on to that thought. Game Theory Foundations: The Prisoner's Dilemma. Let me start with a story that transcends borders and cultures. Imagine two political forces in any democracy facing a crucial decision before every election cycle. They can either 1. Cooperate, play by established democratic norms, engage in policy debates, respect institutions, or 2. Defect, use polarizing rhetoric, bend institutional rules, prioritize winning over norms. What's defection? For those who don't know, it's choosing the option that serves your immediate self interest at the expense of others. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Let's assign some numbers to the outcomes. Think of these as political capital or long term democratic health. Scenario 1. Let's say both sides cooperate. What are the results? Healthy democratic competition, and public trust remains high. Both get plus 3 points. Democracy thrives, voters benefit. Now let's talk about the second scenario. Let's say side A cooperates and side B defects. Then what are your results? Side B gains short term advantage, that is plus 5 points, and side A loses ground, that's minus 1 point. Now let's talk about scenario 3, where side A defects and side B cooperates. Here, side A gets plus 5 and side B gets minus 1 points. Now scenario 4. Let's say both sides choose to defect. What happens? There's institutional breakdown, public cynicism, and democratic erosion. Both gets minus 2 points and everyone loses long-term game. Now here's the trap. If you are a rational political strategist looking at these numbers, what do you choose? Let us think step by step. If the other side cooperates, you get 5 points by defecting versus 3 by cooperating. But if they defect, you get minus 2 by defecting versus minus 1 by cooperating. Either way, defecting seems better. This is the prisoner's dilemma. Individually rational choices leading to collectively irrational outcomes. But here's where politics gets more complex than a simple one shot game. Political movements don't just compete once, they face each other election after election, session after session in their respective parliaments or congresses. This changes everything. Enter tit for tat, one of the most successful strategies discovered in game theory research. It has 4 simple rules. Rule number 1: be nice. Start by cooperating. Rule number 2: be provocable. Retaliate immediately when the opponent defects. Rule number 3: be forgiving. Return to cooperation once the opponent does. Rule number 4: be clear. Make your strategy predictable and transparent. In the 1980s, political scientist Robert Axelrod ran computer tournaments where the different strategies competed in repeated prisoner's dilemmas. Tit for tat won consistently, not by being the smartest or most aggressive, but by being principled yet firm. Now, before we dive into global politics, I want you to think. Can you already see how this might apply? What would tit for tat look like in political strategy? The global political game: 3 democracies, similar patterns. Let's get specific with examples from 3 major democracies. I'll map the competing forces and show how similar game theory dynamics play out across different political systems. But before we proceed, this is analytical, not partisan. Every political movement has cooperated and defected at different times. We are looking at the patterns and strategies, not making moral judgments about individual politicians or movements. Let's talk about India first. Secular inclusive versus religious nationalistic forces. Now, what are these forces? There's secular inclusive camp, which has historically committed to pluralistic democracy, minority rights, and institutional processes. And there's the other group, religious nationalist camp, employing strategies focused on majoritarian religious identity, often described as norm bending by the observers. Now, let's take the example of Kashmir autonomy revocation in 2019. What was the choice of secular camp? It was to cooperate. It called for parliamentary debate and constitutional process. The choice for nationalistic camp was to defect. It bypassed normal legislative procedures and used surprise tactics. And the outcome? Nationalist forces gained politically plus 5 points, and secular forces appeared, we'll say, ineffective minus 1 point. Another example is of citizenship law controversy. What was the secular camp choice? It was to cooperate. It supported peaceful protests and constitutional challenges were raised. And the nationalist camp response to it? Where it defected. Labeled protesters as anti nationals, used heavy handed tactics. And the outcome? The polarization in the country increased and democratic space contracted. Now let's talk about the United States of America. Institutionalists versus populist forces. The forces here were institutionalist camp and populist camp. Institutionalist camp is generally process oriented. It is committed to traditional democratic procedures. And the populist camp, it is willing to challenge established norms, claims direct mandate from quote unquote the people. Example, Supreme Court nominations. What was the institutionalist choice in 2016? It was to cooperate. It accepted Senate leaders' election year rule. And the populist choice in 2020 was to defect. It rushed the confirmation weeks before the election. Well, the outcome, populist gained control in court plus 5, and institutionalists lost strategic position in the court minus 1 point. Another example from America would be election result challenges. Institutionalist choice was to cooperate. It accepted results and used standard legal processes. While the populist choice was to defect. It challenged electoral process itself. Culminated in capital events that the whole world saw. What was the outcome? Institutional norms weakened and the partisan divide deepened. Now let's talk about the United Kingdom. Pro-European versus Brexit supporting forces. The two major forces were one, pro-European camp, which was committed to EU integration, parliamentary procedures, and international cooperation. And the other was the Brexit supporting camp. It claimed to be nationalist, sovereignty focused, willing to challenge EU and domestic institutions. Now, the example would be Brexit process. The pro-European choice was to cooperate. It attempted to use normal parliamentary procedures. The Brexit supporting choice? To defect. Well, it illegally suspended parliament, bypassed normal debate. What was the outcome? Brexit supporters achieved goals plus 5 points. And pro Europeans appeared obstructionists, -1 point. Another example from the UK would be pandemic rule following. Let's say the pro European choice was to cooperate. It followed its own lockdown rules and used parliamentary questions. Now, the Brexit supporting leadership, you can say, initially defected, broke their own rules, stonewalled investigations. And the outcome? Eventually, institutional pressure forced accountability. Here's what's fascinating. Across all three democracies, we see the same pattern. The forces that defect, break, or bend norms often gain short term political advantage. But what about the long term costs? When both groups cooperate, we see that in India, coalition government periods have happened. There has been a long standing bipartisan foreign policy. In the United States, there have been post crisis unity periods, bipartisan infrastructure deals. In the UK, we've seen wartime coalitions, pre Brexit EU membership consensus. When norm respecting forces cooperate, norm bending forces defect. This has been the dominant pattern in recent years across all three democracies. When both the parties defect, in India we have seen emergency period breakdown. In US, we have seen government shutdowns, constitutional crises. In UK, parliamentary deadlock scenarios. The strategic dilemma is identical across democracies. If you keep cooperating while your opponent keeps defecting, you keep losing. But if you start defecting too, you become part of the problem. So, what would you do? Whether you are secular forces facing religious nationalism, institutionalists facing populism, or pro Europeans facing nationalist movements, the game theory suggests a sophisticated solution. Strategic solutions, tit for tat across democracies. This is where game theory offers a solution that goes beyond both naive cooperation and destructive defection. A tit for tat strategy looks remarkably similar across different democratic systems. Start nice. Begin each interaction assuming good faith, following democratic norms, but be provocable. When opponents defect, respond firmly and immediately. Now let's see what firm response looks like across the three democracies we talked about. India, secular inclusive strategy. There are multiple strategies that secular inclusive group can follow. Legal retaliation. It can be immediate constitutional challenges, public interest litigations, and sustained legal warfare. Coalition building can also be there. Strategic alliances with regional parties, civil society, and minority groups. Communication is another important factor. A clear messaging about norm breaking and making the defection visible to voters. There are successful examples of it. One would be farmers' movement support in 2020-2021. Sustained political backing forced the government to retreat the problematic farm bills. Missed opportunity? Currency demonetization in 2016. The scattered response instead of coordinated retaliation was a missed opportunity. In the United States, institutionalist strategy could be legal response, special investigations, impeachment proceedings, congressional oversight. Institutional protection, use of procedural rules, state level resistance, and court challenges. There can be coalition building, working with traditional conservatives, civil society, and media. There are successful examples of this as well. 2020 election defense, coordinated legal challenges, and institutional protection was there. There are mixed results also. Court responses, eventual reform discussions, but delayed actions on structural issues. In United Kingdom, pro-European strategy would be parliamentary tactics. No confidence votes, emergency debates, cross-party cooperation. Legal challenges can be court cases against illegal prorogation. Procedural challenges could be there. Coalition building, working with Liberal Democrats, Scottish nationalists, and rebel conservatives. There are successful examples of this. Anti prorogation coalition, cross party effort that led to Supreme Court victory. Ongoing challenges, there are post Brexit institutional reforms responding to executive overreach, etc. Now, what are the crucial elements? One is be forgiving. When opponents return to cooperative behavior, reciprocate immediately. In India, that would be secular cooperation on foreign policy when nationalist forces follow norms. In US, institutionalist cooperation on infrastructure when bipartisan approach emerges. In UK, pro-European support for legitimate policies regardless of source. Another crucial element would be clear. Make strategy transparent across all systems. It could be consistent messaging across elections and policy areas. We will follow democratic norms, but we will not allow advantage through norm breaking. Should be stated loud and clear. Here's what's sophisticated about it for that. It's not about being nice or mean. It's about being predictable and proportional. Opponents learn that cooperation is rewarded and defection is punished. But punishment doesn't escalate permanently. And what is the retaliation? The retaliation is 1. Being defensive, responding to defection, not initiating it. Second, be proportional, matching the level of defection, not escalating beyond it. Third, conditional, stopping when the cooperation resumes. Universal principles, advanced game theory concepts. Now let's explore the deeper dynamics that apply across all democratic systems. Zero sum versus non zero sum games. Democratic competition is fundamentally non zero sum. When norms hold, even losing sides benefit from it. The benefits could be institutional protection when out of power, credible path to return to power, protection of their supporters' rights, stable governance benefiting everyone. This is true whether we are talking about Indian parliamentary democracy, American presidential system, or a British Westminster system. The public goods game. Democratic norms are public goods. Everyone benefits, but they require everyone's cooperation to maintain. We are seeing institutional degradation across democracies because too many players are free riding, breaking norms while others maintain them. Examples across the systems are in India, there's institutional bypassing and communal polarization. In US, electoral norm breaking and constitutional crisis threats. In UK, convention violations, parliamentary manipulations. Evolutionary stability and learning. Here's something hopeful. When players interact repeatedly and observe outcomes, cooperative strategies tend to emerge over time. Positive examples of this could be in India, coalition governments learning to work together across ideological lines. In United States, post-crisis institutional reforms, civil rights era, bipartisan cooperation. In UK, it would be post-war consensus periods, devolution settlements. The shadow of the future. How much do players care about future interactions? If movements think they can win permanently, they are more likely to defect. But knowing they'll face the same opponents repeatedly makes cooperation more attractive. What are the current challenges? One is polarization making future cooperation seem unlikely. Another would be social media creating shorter term thinking. Third, populist movements claiming permanent mandates. And then there's signaling and reputation. Your reputation becomes a strategic asset in repeated games. Successful signaling examples are consistent institutional defense across multiple issues, predictable responses to norm breaking, and clear communication of red lines and consequences. What is remarkable is how similar the strategic challenges are across very different political systems. The game theory dynamics transcend cultural and institutional differences. Conclusion: Universal lessons for democratic strategy. Let me leave you with insights that apply whether you are in New Delhi, Washington, D.C., or London. The most successful political strategies aren't about being the nicest or the most ruthless. They're about being strategically smart over long term, regardless of your political system. Tit for tat works across the democracies because it creates universal incentives. Cooperation is rewarded, defection is punished, but punishment doesn't become a permanent hostility. There are some universal strategic principles. First, maintain institutional credibility. Your reputation for following norms becomes an asset. Second, respond proportionally. Match defection with firm but measure retaliation. 3. Build coalitions. Democratic defense works best when it crosses ideological lines. 4. Communicate clearly. Make your strategy predictable and transparent. 5. Stay patient. Democratic competition is a repeated game, not a single context. Always remember that. So, returning to our opening question, whether you are thinking about secular forces or religious nationalism, institutionalists or populists, or pro Europeans versus nationalist movements, if you are advising forces committed to democratic norms but tired of losing to opponents who break them, the game theory answer is universal. Be nice, be firm, be forgiving, and be predictable. Start cooperating, retaliate immediately when cheated, return to cooperation when they do, and make sure everyone understands your strategy. The beauty of game theory is that these insights transcend borders, cultures, and political systems. The strategic logic of cooperation and competition is universal. Whether we are talking about religious versus secular politics, populist versus institutionalist movements, or nationalist versus internationalist forces. If you found this global analysis helpful, if you want to explore how these political principles apply to your local political context, or if you have examples from other democracies, let me know. Send me your thoughts, your questions, your disagreements from wherever you are in the world. I'm your host, and this is Curiosity and Co podcast. Thanks for joining me for this journey across three democracies and the universal principles that govern political strategy. Subscribe for more episodes where we decode the hidden logic behind power, cooperation, and competition worldwide. And remember, whether you are in Mumbai, Manchester, or Minneapolis, in the long game of democracy, the smartest players often win not by being the most aggressive, but by being the most strategically sophisticated. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you around. Ciao.